The moment that girl ran toward my rig, screaming into the cold midnight air, something inside me froze, like the world narrowed into a single, shattering point. Her voice cracked with a terror I've only heard a handful of times in my life, the kind that rips through a man's spine and leaves him breathless. And her words, those words carved themselves into the silence between heartbeats. He has my sister. Tell me, what would you do if a stranger, barely 16, sprinted toward your truck like the darkness itself was hunting her? Because in that instant, with diesel fumes thick in the air and frost clinging to my windshield, I knew this night was going to demand more from me than the road ever had. Before I even stepped out of the cab, questions slammed into me like breakers against rock. Who was chasing her? Where was her sister? How far behind was the danger? The highway around me stretched out black and empty, the kind of stillness that sharpens every sound, distant tires humming, the faint whistle of wind sliding between fuel pumps, the neon sign flickering like it was struggling to stay alive. This wasn't the place for a teenage girl to be running for her life, and yet, here she was, stumbling toward my truck, desperation pushing her faster than her legs could handle. I swung open the door and stepped down into the freezing air, boots crunching over gravel as I moved toward her. My breath fogged out in sharp bursts as I caught her by the shoulders. She was trembling so violently it felt like her bones were vibrating. Aria, that's the name she managed to choke out, looked up at me with eyes wide and drenched in terror. She could barely form the words, but she forced them out anyway, like speaking them was the only thing keeping hope alive. He took Sloan. Please, please help me. And right then, the weight of the night settled on my shoulders like a verdict. The smell of gasoline drifted through the air, mixing with the cold bite of winter and the static hum of distant truck engines. I could feel Aria's panic pulsing through her grip on my jacket, her breaths coming in shallow bursts that matched the quick stuttering of her heartbeat. My name is Logan Hayes, and I've been on these roads for more years than I care to admit. I've seen things in the dead of night that would make most folks lock their doors and never look back. But nothing prepares you for a girl this scared, this desperate, whispering her sister's name like a prayer she's afraid won't be answered. I scanned the lot, every shadow suddenly feeling too tall, too still, too watchful. The truck stop lights buzzed overhead, flickering just enough to make the darkness feel alive. Aria kept looking back toward the highway, flinching at every movement, every gust of wind, every flicker of neon. It was clear, whoever took her sister wasn't far, and if he realized Aria had escaped, he'd be coming. Panic like hers doesn't spark from imagination. It's born from something real, something close, something dangerous. As I guided her toward my rig, my boots grinding over broken gravel, a thought hit me with brutal force. What if I was already too late? What if Sloan was somewhere out there, terrified, alone, praying someone would come looking for her? That kind of fear builds a pressure inside a man, a need to act before thinking, before doubting, before hesitating. The cold wind whipped across the lot, scattering old receipts and dust, and every instinct in me sharpened like a blade. The road makes you tired, but moments like this remind you what strength really means. And if you're hearing this now, I need you to understand something. Stories like this, they aren't told for entertainment. They're warnings. They're lifelines. They're reminders that the night hides things most people never see. So if you're still here with me, if you're feeling the weight of Aria's terror the way I did that night, then let me ask you to do one thing. Hit that like button. Not for me, but for the people out there who need these stories to know danger when they see it, to recognize fear in someone's voice, to act before it's too late. Your support keeps these truths alive, and someone somewhere might need them more than you know. Aria's breathing hitched as I opened the passenger door and helped her climb into the cab. She kept twisting in her seat, checking the mirrors, scanning the shadows like she expected someone to appear out of them at any second. Her hands were shaking so badly, she could barely hold on to the doorframe. I could see dirt smeared across her jeans, a scrape on her arm that looked fresh like she'd fallen hard and fast before running. Fear leaves marks, on skin, on breath, on the way someone can barely sit still. Aria was covered in all of them. The wind howled across the empty lot, carrying with it the faintest echo of an engine revving somewhere down the road. Aria stiffened instantly, her voice cracking as she begged me to hurry. She said Derek would come looking for her. Derek Colt. That name alone carried a chill I couldn't explain yet, but Aria said it with the kind of dread that only comes from knowing exactly what someone is capable of. She kept repeating that he had Sloan, that he dragged her into a black SUV and drove off into the dark. I'd heard stories like this before, but never with a kid sitting in my truck, shaking and terrified. I told her to take a deep breath, but she couldn't, not fully. Fear had its hands wrapped around her lungs, squeezing. She glanced out the window and her voice dropped to a whisper as she said Sloan was only 13. 13, a kid with her whole life ahead of her. A kid who should have been asleep in a warm bed, not trapped with a man like Derek Colt. The thought sent a surge of anger through me, hot enough to burn away any hesitation. I'd been tired before Arya ran toward my rig. I wasn't tired anymore. I slammed my door shut, the echo rippling through the empty truck stop. The cab vibrated around us, the quiet hum of the engine mixing with the muted crackle of Arya's uneven breathing. I flicked on the headlights, letting the beams slice through the darkness. The road ahead glowed a dim strip of silver, dust swirling across the asphalt like restless spirits. Everything in me tightened, not from fear, but from focus. I'd chased men before, men running from guilt, from debts, from the wreckage they'd caused, but never someone who'd taken a child. Arya told me Derek wasn't alone. She said a second man, Reese Maddox, was waiting in another car watching the girls while Derek handled business. That word tasted sour when she said it. Business. As if whatever they were planning to do with Sloane could ever be called something so casual. Arya said Derek grabbed Sloane first and yelled at Reese to get Arya, but she'd managed to slip under a fence and sprint toward the lights of the truck stop. Her breath faltered as she spoke, guilt clawing its way into her voice. She kept saying she should have fought harder. I told her running for help was the bravest thing she could have done. The neon sign above the fuel pumps flickered again, casting a broken glow across the hood of my truck. My grip tightened on the wheel as Arya whispered that Derek always said no one would ever believe them, that no one would ever come. But here she was, breathless, trembling, and here I was. The road has a strange way of bringing the right people together at the right moment. Maybe it was luck, maybe it was fate, maybe it was something darker, nudging me into a night I couldn't walk away from. Then Arya grabbed my sleeve with a strength that surprised me. Her voice shook, but her words were sharp as glass. "Logan, if we don't find her soon, he's going to disappear with her." And just like that, the chase began, not with roaring engines or screeching tires, but with a promise I intended to keep. I pushed the rig into gear, the engine rumbling like a beast waking from a deep sleep. The cab vibrated beneath us as I eased onto the highway, headlights carving a path through the thick darkness. Arya hugged her arms against her chest, shoulders trembling as she kept glancing at the rearview mirror, terrified Derek's SUV would appear behind us. The road stretched out endlessly ahead, cold, empty, silent. But silence on a night like this wasn't comfort. It was pressure. It was the universe holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I asked Arya which direction Derek had gone, and she pointed up the northbound lane with a trembling hand. Her voice cracked as she explained how fast he'd driven, how the taillights had vanished into the dark within seconds. She said Reese's car had followed close behind, and that the two men never stayed in one place for long. They were always moving, always shifting locations like ghosts with bad intentions. My grip tightened on the wheel, knuckles whitening under the dim dashboard glow. The idea of Sloane trapped in that SUV made my stomach twist. The cold night air seeped into the cab through the vents, carrying the scent of pine from the distant tree line and the lingering smell of diesel from the truck stop behind us. Arya kept her eyes fixed on the road, searching for any sign, skid marks, headlights, anything that might tell us we were on the right track. She whispered that Sloane had cried out for her as Derek dragged her into the SUV. That memory hit her like a blow to the chest, and she folded in on herself, trying to stifle the sob burning in her throat. I reached over, steady and firm, telling her she wasn't alone in this. The highway lights disappeared one by one as we moved deeper into the rural stretch, a place where even the moon felt hesitant to shine. The hum of the tires on asphalt was the only steady sound, a rhythm that matched the pounding in my chest. Every few minutes, Arya would point out something, a piece of trash on the shoulder, a reflector that caught the light, and ask if it could mean they'd passed through. I told her we'd find something, we'd find them, but in the quiet between her questions, I couldn't help feeling the seconds slipping away, each one pulling Sloane farther from safety. Then out of the darkness, something glinted on the right side of the road. Arya gasped, leaning toward the window with sudden intensity. I slowed the truck and eased onto the shoulder, the tires crunching over gravel. Under the harsh beam of the headlights, I spotted it, a small lavender hair clip, half buried in the dirt, shaped like a butterfly. Arya's breath left her in a single, shattered gasp. "That's Sloane's," she whispered, voice breaking as she pressed a hand to her mouth. The clip was scratched, bent slightly like it had been torn out during a struggle. I climbed down from the cab, boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. The freezing air slapped my face as I crouched beside the clip, my breath misting in front of me. The night around us felt different now, charged, electric, like the darkness was holding its own secrets. I picked up the clip gently and handed it to Arya when she stepped out beside me. She held it as if it were a piece of her sister's heartbeat, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The emotion in her eyes wasn't just fear anymore, It was determination, raw and burning. I walked ahead a few steps, letting the headlights stretch across the road, scanning for tire tracks or anything that looked out of place. Then I found them, fresh tire marks, swerving wildly toward the shoulder, before correcting back onto the lane. A sudden stop, a struggle. Derek must have pulled over here, maybe to restrain Sloane, maybe to argue with Reese, maybe to keep Arya from catching up. Whatever happened, it meant we were close. Too close for comfort, and a storm of adrenaline surged through me as I realized this wasn't just a chase anymore, it was a countdown. Arya stood beside me on the shoulder, clutching that lavender hair clip, like it was the last piece of her sister left in the world. The cold wind whipped her hair across her face, but she didn't wipe it away. She just stared at the tire tracks, her breath trembling, her eyes hollow with fear and fury. I'd seen that look before, on people pushed past their breaking point. People who refused to quit even when the night tried to swallow them whole. Arya wasn't just scared anymore. She was igniting, and that fire was going to keep her standing long after exhaustion begged her to fall. I followed the tire marks with my flashlight, tracing the grooves as they curved sharply off the road and back on again. The dirt around the shoulder was disturbed. Boot prints, dragged marks, the imprint of someone kneeling or falling. My gut clenched. A struggle had happened here, recently. I stood still for a moment, letting the quiet speak. The distant hum of a semi faded behind us, swallowed by the darkness. The trees rustled softly, but there was no traffic, no voices, no sign of Derek or Reese. They were ahead of us, and not by much. Arya walked closer, pointing out a small scrap of fabric snagged on a thorn bush near the guardrail. It was pastel blue, silky, torn at the edge. She lifted it with trembling fingers, recognition instantly draining the color from her face. "Sloane's sweater," she whispered, her voice collapsing under the weight of it. I felt something inside me twist. Anger, grief, responsibility all crashing together. I'd seen too many remnants like this on lonely stretches of highway. They were breadcrumbs left by desperation, signs that someone had fought hard for their life. I knelt beside the marks again, examining the depth of the tire impressions. Derek had slammed on the brakes, hard. Panic or anger had driven that stop. Maybe Sloane fought him. Maybe Reese questioned the plan. Maybe something spooked them. Whatever it was, it meant their grip wasn't as controlled as they wanted it to be. And cracks like that? Cracks are where justice gets in. I stood scanning the horizon, letting the darkness settle into shapes. The sky was moonless, a black sheet swallowing the world. But in that suffocating silence, I felt something pulsing. Momentum. We were gaining. Arya stepped closer to me, her breath hitching as she asked whether Sloane was still alive. The question hung in the air like a blade suspended by a thread. I didn't lie to her. I told her the truth only a man who's lived on the road can understand. If Derek had already done the worst, he wouldn't be running. He wouldn't be panicking. He wouldn't be tearing down back roads and throwing clues behind him like sparks. Men like Derek only run when their victims are alive, because control means more to them than escape, and that meant Sloane still had time, if we moved fast enough. The air thickened as the wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of burnt rubber from somewhere up ahead. I took a few steps onto the pavement, letting my headlights stretch farther into the dark. That's when I saw it, a faint glimmer far in the distance, like a pair of taillights just cresting a hill before disappearing again. Red dots swallowed quickly by the curve of the road. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. Arya saw them too, her breath catching in her throat as she grabbed my sleeve. We weren't just on the right path. We were finally closing the distance. I turned back toward the rig and motioned for Arya to climb in. She sprinted toward the cab without hesitation, her urgency mirrored in every step I took behind her. When I pulled myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door, the engine roared beneath us like it could feel the rising tension. The road ahead stretched like a fuse toward an explosion waiting to happen. Arya kept her eyes fixed on the darkness, her hands gripping the dashboard as if she could will us faster, and I promised her, quietly, firmly, that we weren't stopping until we got Sloane back. The rig growled as I pushed it harder than I usually dared on an empty stretch of midnight highway. The vibration of the engine pulsed up through the floorboards and into my legs, each hum feeding the urgency clawing at my chest. Arya sat forward in her seat, eyes glued to the darkness ahead, every muscle pulled tight like a drawn bow. The air inside the cab felt heavy, almost electric, charged with her fear and my determination. I kept scanning the road for any sign, any shadow, any glint of metal, any flicker of taillights that said Derek and Reese were still within reach. The night pressed in around us, as the landscape shifted from open highway to dense forest, hugging both sides of the road. The moon was still hiding, refusing to offer even a sliver of light, and the only thing keeping the darkness at bay was the twin beam of my headlights slicing through the void. Arya's voice trembled as she pointed out that Derek knew these back roads well. Too well. She said the men had been taking girls between towns for months, quietly, quickly, slipping through the cracks of small communities where no one paid enough attention. I felt a cold anger settle deep in my stomach, heavy and sharp. I tightened my grip on the wheel, jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Men like Derek didn't just vanish after one mistake. They thrived on silence, on people being too scared or too ashamed to speak. Arya explained how he'd threatened her and Sloane before, how he'd stalked them for weeks, waiting for their parents to work late, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It made my blood run cold. The way she described him, the way her voice cracked on certain details, told me Derek wasn't some impulsive monster. He was calculated, patient, the most dangerous kind. The road curved sharply, and as I rounded the bend, I caught it again, the faintest glow of distant taillights bouncing between the trees far, far up the road. Arya gasped, her hand flying to the glass. "That's them," she whispered, voice breaking into equal parts fear and hope. I felt my pulse surge. The rig wasn't built for high-speed chases, but adrenaline has a way of squeezing out every bit of power a machine's got. I pushed the accelerator deeper, listening as the engine strained, gears whining their protest. But the truck obeyed. Arya's breathing picked up as we closed the distance inch by inch. She leaned closer to the windshield, eyes wide, whispering Sloane's name like she was afraid the universe would forget it if she didn't say it enough times. Her voice wrapped around that name with a kind of love that shattered something inside me. I'd driven countless miles alone in the dark, but hearing her whisper her sister's name with that much fear, it made the night feel different, more personal, more urgent. I wasn't just chasing a criminal anymore. I was chasing time. The SUV ahead began to swerve slightly, like Derek had spotted us in his rearview mirror. Arya tensed, burying her nails into the fabric of the seat. She asked what would happen if he realized she'd escaped. What if he panicked? What if he hurt Sloane to get rid of evidence? The thought made her voice collapse mid-sentence. I shook my head, steady but fierce, telling her Derek wouldn't risk slowing down. Not with witnesses behind him, not with headlights closing in. His kind always panicked at the wrong time, always made mistakes when control slipped through their fingers. Then, as if the night wanted to test our resolve, a pair of headlights appeared in the opposite lane, bright, blinding for a moment, and Arya ducked instinctively. My heart leapt into my throat, but the car passed harmlessly, disappearing into the rearview mirror like a ghost dissolving into the dark. Still, the moment reminded me just how fragile our chase was, how quickly things could go wrong. I took a deep breath, let the rig settle into its rhythm, and kept pushing forward. The road wasn't giving us a choice. Not tonight. Not with Sloane out there praying for someone, anyone, to come for her. The chase tightened like a noose as the road narrowed, trees closing in on both sides like dark walls. The SUV ahead dipped out of sight for a moment as Derek took a sharp turn onto an unmarked side road, a road so tight and hidden it almost disappeared into the forest. Arya gasped, recognizing it instantly. She said it led to an abandoned sawmill deep in the woods, a place locals avoided even during the day. The kind of place men like Derek chose on purpose. It wasn't just remote, it was forgotten. Forgotten places swallow screams, and that thought sent a chill straight down my spine. I jerked the wheel and guided the rig onto the turn, the truck groaning under the tight angle. Gravel spat out from under the tires as the forest swallowed us whole. The headlights carved narrow tunnels of light through the branches, revealing patches of fog drifting low across the road. Arya pressed a hand against her chest, breath shaking, whispering that Sloane hated this road, hated the way it made her feel like someone was watching from between the trees. Her voice cracked at the memory, and I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. Kids feel danger long before adults do. The narrow road forced me to slow down, but we were still closing in. The SUV's taillights blinked through the trees like a wounded animal retreating into its den. Branches scraped against the side of the truck, screeching like fingernails across metal, and Arya flinched at every sound. Her fingers tightened around Sloane's hair clip, clutched so fiercely it dug into her palm. She whispered apologies to her sister, quiet, broken apologies, as if she thought she'd failed her simply by surviving. I told her she hadn't failed anything. She had done the bravest thing she could have done. She ran for help, and because she did, we were here. The road inched downward, sloping into a clearing where the silhouette of the abandoned sawmill emerged, massive, skeletal, looming like the carcass of some long-dead beast. Part of the roof had caved in. Shattered windows stared out like empty eyes. Rusted metal beams jutted into the night sky, black against black. And there, parked crooked near the entrance, was Derek's SUV. Its headlights were off. Its doors were open. The engine clicked as it cooled, but something was wrong. The scene was too still, too quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold back. as if waiting for the next terrible truth to reveal itself. Arya sucked in a sharp breath, her body freezing as she stared at the SUV. She whispered Sloane's name, barely audible, as if afraid the ruins would swallow it. I threw the truck into park and jumped down, the cold slamming into me like a wall. The smell of wet earth, old oil, and rotting wood filled the air. My boots crunched across the gravel as I approached the SUV with careful, deliberate steps. The interior light was on, illuminating an empty back seat and a flannel blanket tossed aside like someone had yanked it out in a hurry. Arya climbed out behind me, her legs shaking, her eyes scanning every dark corner for signs of her sister. Then I saw it, a small sneaker half hidden beneath the passenger seat, pale pink with a little star printed on the side. My heart thudded painfully hard. I pulled it out and held it up for Arya to see. She broke instantly, knees buckling as she choked out that it was Sloane's. She'd worn those shoes the day they were taken. I knelt beside her, steadying her shoulders as she struggled to breathe, the cold air mingling with her sobs. This was proof, not just that we were close, but that Derek had dragged her into this forgotten place. And if the SUV had been abandoned, then Derek was still inside the sawmill. I rose to my feet, scanning the shattered windows and the yawning darkness inside the building. A faint glow flickered deeper within, dim, unstable, maybe from a flashlight or a lantern. Movement stirred in the shadows, just enough to unsettle the air. Arya whispered that Derek wouldn't hurt Sloane yet, not while he believed he still had control. But control was exactly what I intended to take from him tonight. Every instinct in me sharpened, breath growing slow, deliberate. I told Arya to stay behind me and stick close. The night wasn't done with us yet, not by a long shot. The moment we stepped toward the sawmill's entrance, a cold dread settled over the clearing, heavy enough to make the air feel thicker. The building loomed above us like a rusted monster, its skeleton creaking with every push of the wind. Arya clung to my jacket with trembling fingers, her breaths shallow and uneven, as she whispered Sloane's name into the darkness. I could feel her fear vibrating through her grip, but beneath it, something stronger was brewing, an unbreakable thread of love pulling her forward despite the terror threatening to swallow her whole. She wasn't just scared, she was desperate. Desperation sharpens everything. I stepped inside first, boots echoing off gnarled wooden planks that had been left to rot for decades. The faint glow we'd seen from outside flickered again deeper within the structure, bouncing erratically off old machinery and rusted conveyor belts. Shadows stretched long and distorted across the broken floor, twisting with every shift of light. The smell of damp sawdust mixed with oil and decay. It wasn't just a forgotten building, it was a tomb of abandoned stories, the kind of place where evil feels at home. And tonight, evil had a name, Derek Colt. Arya stayed behind me but refused to stay far. She kept calling Sloane softly, her voice cracking, each whisper more desperate than the last. The deeper we walked, the louder her heartbeat seemed to echo in the stillness, or maybe that was mine pounding in sync with hers. Every step felt like walking deeper into a throat, the building swallowing us whole. Then faintly I heard it, not a word, not a cry, a muffled sound, like fabric shifting, like someone trying to breathe quietly through fear. I lifted my hand, signaling Arya to stop. Her eyes widened as she strained to hear it too. I followed the sound toward a narrow hallway formed by fallen beams and toppled metal sheets. As we approached, a small shape flickered in the corner of my vision, a beam of light trembling across the floor. Someone was holding a flashlight. Someone was close. I moved slower, steps precise, my breath steady despite the rush of adrenaline flooding my veins. The sound grew clearer. Soft sobs choked and panicked. Arya gasped and covered her mouth, tears spilling over because she recognized it instantly. It was Sloane. Her sister was just ahead, terrified and trying to hide. Before I could step forward, a shadow shifted around the corner. A man's silhouette appeared. Broad shoulders, tense posture, breath ragged. Derek. He was hunched over, gripping something in one hand, flashlight in the other. He muttered angrily under his breath, pacing like a predator trying to decide his next move. I felt Arya stiffen behind me, her nails digging into my arm as she tried not to make a sound. Derek's head snapped up suddenly, his flashlight sweeping the darkness. The beam passed over the machinery, then over Arya's sneaker, then grazed my boot. He froze. Silence burned between us for a split second before Derek's voice slithered out of the shadows, thick with venom. I knew someone would come, he hissed, but I didn't expect a hero. He stepped forward, face twisted with frustration and arrogance. The flashlight shook slightly in his hand, revealing cuts across his knuckles, signs of a struggle, signs Sloane had fought back. Rage ignited in my chest, hot and uncontrollable. Derek noticed the shift in my stance and his smirk widened. "You're too late," he said quietly. "She's already broken." Arya lunged before I could stop her. shouting Sloane's name with a rawness that ricocheted through the hollow building. Derek snapped toward the sound, eyes feral, and for the first time that night, he looked genuinely afraid, not of me, but of losing control. He raised his free hand like he was about to reach for something tucked in his jacket, but I moved faster. I stepped between him and Arya, blocking the path with my entire body. Derek's smirk faltered. He finally realized this wasn't the kind of night he could bluff his way out of, and he wasn't walking out with Sloane. Derek's flashlight beam jittered across the floor as he tightened his grip, his eyes darting between me and Arya like a trapped animal calculating escape routes. But there were none. Not anymore. The moment he saw I wasn't backing up, something in his posture shifted. His shoulders tensed, his jaw clenched, and that sickening smirk on his face cracked just enough to reveal the fear underneath. Evil men aren't used to being confronted. They're used to darkness, to silence, to victims too scared to scream. Tonight, he had none of those advantages left. He lunged first, swinging the flashlight toward my head in a wild arc meant to stun. I ducked instinctively, the beam slicing through the air above me. The impact shattered the flashlight against a rusted beam, plunging the hallway into choking darkness. Arya gasped behind me, stumbling back. Derek cursed, scrambling for something in his jacket. I couldn't see his face, but I could hear every ragged breath he took, every desperate shuffle of his boots against the broken wood. The darkness wasn't on his side anymore. It was mine. Years of driving through pitch-black nights had taught me how to listen, how to move, how to fight without sight. A faint crackle of light flickered from deeper inside the sawmill, a dim emergency lantern someone must have left years ago. Its orange glow barely reached us, but it was enough to cast jagged shadows across Derek's silhouette. He yanked something out of his jacket, metal glinting as it caught the weak light. A knife. My blood went cold, but my resolve hardened. Men like Derek don't bring knives for threats. They bring them for control, for pain, for endings. And I wasn't about to let him end anything tonight. Arya's breathing trembled faster as Derek took a step toward us, the blade catching a sliver of lantern light. I whispered for her to stay behind me no matter what happened. She nodded through her tears, gripping Sloane's hair clip like a lifeline. Derek moved again, this time slower, more calculated. The confidence in his stride came back, like he believed the knife restored his power. He tilted his head, voice dripping with venom as he said, I should have stayed out of it, that I was risking my life for damaged goods. Those words ignited something explosive inside me, a fire fueled by every injustice I'd ever witnessed on the road. He slashed forward, aiming for my side. I dodged, the blade grazing my jacket and slicing through the fabric. Pain flared as it scratched my skin, but adrenaline drowned it out. I grabbed Derek's wrist with both hands, twisting it violently until the knife slipped free and clattered across the floor. He roared in pain, swinging his other fist wildly, hitting my jaw with enough force to rattle my teeth. The world blurred for half a heartbeat before sharpening into focus again. I drove my shoulder into him, slamming him hard against a metal support beam. The impact shook dust from the ceiling in a choking cloud. He staggered, disoriented, and that's when Arya screamed her sister's name. Sloane's voice, weak, cracked, terrified, answered from somewhere deeper in the sawmill. The sound sliced through me like a blade. Derek's head snapped violently toward the direction of her voice, panic surging across his features. His control was slipping faster than he could hide it, and that fear, the fear of losing the victim he depended on, was his undoing. I stepped forward, blocking his path, making it clear he wasn't getting anywhere near Sloane again. Derek stumbled backward, footsteps uneven, breath ragged as he realized he was cornered. His eyes darted wildly around the sawmill, searching for escape, for leverage, for any chance at regaining power. But there was none. The shadows weren't cooperating. His knife was gone. His flashlight was shattered, and his arrogance, his greatest weapon, had crumbled into dust. For the first time since we stepped inside the sawmill, I saw Derek Colt for what he truly was. Not a monster, not a mastermind, just a coward hiding behind pain he inflicted on others. Sloane's trembling voice echoed again, drifting through the hollow corridors of the sawmill like a fragile thread begging to be followed. Arya bolted toward the sound, but I caught her arm gently, forcing her to stay close behind me. The sawmill was too big, too broken, too full of dark corners where a desperate man could lash out. I wasn't letting either girl out of my sight. Derek staggered deeper into the shadows, clutching his injured wrist, muttering curses that bounced off the rusted walls. He was losing control fast, and desperate men are the most dangerous kind. Arya pointed toward a narrow passage between two fallen beams, her voice cracking as she insisted Sloane was down there. I guided us forward, listening for every breath, every creak, every shift in the dark. The lantern light behind us flickered, barely illuminating our path. The wooden floor groaned under our weight, splinters jutting out like teeth waiting to bite. As we moved deeper, the air grew colder, thicker, heavy with damp sawdust and something else. A faint whimper. Sloane. It was her. She was close enough to hear us. I crouched low, shining my phone's weak flashlight between the beams. There she was, Sloane Thompson, curled against an old steel drum, wrists bound with a torn strip of denim, hair tangled, cheeks streaked with tears and grime. Her wide eyes snapped toward us the moment the light brushed her face. Fear flooded her gaze at first, pure and instinctive. But when she saw Aria behind me, saw her sister alive, fighting, searching, Sloane's breath broke into a sob that rattled through the empty mill. Aria dropped to her knees beside her, whispering her name over and over, like saying it was the only way to stitch the broken night back together. I cut the denim restraints with my pocket knife, hands steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. Sloane flinched every time my fingers brushed her wrists, but she held her breath and let me work, trusting me because Aria did. That was all the permission I needed. Once she was free, she collapsed into her sister's arms, clinging to Aria with a desperation that tore straight into my chest. The sound of their crying, raw, relieved, terrified, filled the hollow building, echoing louder than any scream Derek could have thrown at us. But relief was short-lived. Footsteps thundered somewhere behind us, heavy, stumbling, fast. Derek hadn't run. He hadn't given up. He wasn't done. I spun toward the sound, flashlight beams slicing through the darkness just as Derek lunged from the shadows with a broken, jagged metal rod in his hand, swinging wildly. His voice was twisted with rage, curses spilling out like venom. He bellowed that no one was taking his girls. Aria shielded Sloane instinctively, pulling her close against the drum as Derek charged. I stepped into his path, blocking him with every inch of strength I had left. The metal rod clashed against a rusted pipe beside me, sparks flying as Derek stumbled forward. His momentum threw him off balance, and I grabbed his jacket, ripping him sideways and slamming him against the concrete pillar. The impact shook the whole structure, sending dust and debris raining down around us. Derek roared, swinging again, but rage had blinded him. Each blow was clumsy, wild, fueled by panic, not control. He swung once more, but this time I caught his arm mid-strike, twisting it until he screamed in pain. The metal rod clattered to the ground. Derek collapsed to his knees, breath ragged, face contorted in a mixture of fury and fear. He looked up at me, eyes bloodshot, voice trembling as he spat out one last threat, that even if he went down, others would come, that men like him didn't work alone. A cold chill ran through me. Maybe he was lying. Maybe he wasn't. Either way, tonight wasn't ending with him walking out of that sawmill ever again. I held Derek down with every ounce of strength I had left, the weight of the moment pressing as heavily on my chest as the night itself. His breath came in sharp, ragged bursts, his body trembling under my grip. But I didn't look away, not from him, not from what he'd done, not from what he'd tried to destroy. For a moment the world narrowed to just the two of us, his cruelty staring straight into my resolve. And then something in him cracked. His eyes darted toward Aria and Sloane, huddled together in the dim glow of my flashlight, and for the first time all night, I saw fear in him. Not fear of me, but fear of losing the control he'd built his entire life around. I forced him onto his stomach, ripped an old extension cord from a fallen workbench, and bound his wrists tight behind his back. He screamed, thrashed, cursed every name he could spit out, but it didn't matter. His power had evaporated the moment the girls were freed, the moment he realized he wasn't the wolf in this story anymore. I pulled him to his feet and shoved him hard against a steel column. He slumped there, breathing like a wounded animal, rage flickering in and out of his eyes like dying embers. He wasn't a threat anymore. He was just a man facing the end of his darkness. I turned back toward Aria and Sloane, who clung to each other like their whole world depended on that embrace. Sloane trembled violently, but she wasn't crying anymore. She was breathing. That was enough. Aria stroked her hair with shaking hands, whispering promises only sisters understand. I crouched beside them, keeping my voice low and steady, telling them we were going home, telling them Derek wasn't ever touching them again. Sloane reached out weakly, her small hand brushing my sleeve in a silent thank you that hit me harder than any blow Derek had managed to land. I lifted Sloane gently into my arms, feeling her ribs through her torn shirt, her heartbeat still fluttering like a trapped bird. Aria stayed close, refusing to let go of her sister's hand even for a second. Together, we walked out of the sawmill and into the cold night air. The clearing felt different now, still dark, still silent, but no longer suffocating. The headlights of my rig cut through the darkness, a beacon pulling us out of the nightmare. I settled Sloane carefully into the passenger seat, wrapping my old truck blanket around her shoulders. She leaned into Arya's side, exhausted but safe. The police arrived 25 minutes later, their lights flashing red and blue across the twisted steel of the sawmill. Officers dragged Derek out by his bound wrists, his shouts swallowed by the night as they threw him into the back of a cruiser. Reese Maddox was found hiding in the woods behind the mill, whimpering like a dog caught stealing scraps. They were both taken away, their darkness finally cornered by something stronger: truth, courage, and the unbroken will of two sisters who refused to disappear quietly. I watched the cars pull away with a weight lifting slowly from my shoulders. As the adrenaline faded, exhaustion took its place, sinking deep into my bones. Arya and Sloane sat in the cab, wrapped together under the blanket, watching me with tear-streaked faces and eyes full of gratitude. I leaned against the truck for a moment, letting the cold soothe the burn in my muscles. Nights like this, they change you. They carve something into your soul. And as I climbed back into the truck, the girls shifted to make room. Two survivors who had walked through hell and refused to break. I felt something I hadn't felt in years: purpose. The road has a way of reminding you who you are when you've almost forgotten. I turned to them with a tired smile, telling them the worst was behind us, and that the road ahead would finally lead somewhere safe. And if you've listened to all of this, every heartbeat, every mile, every moment where the darkness tried to win, then understand this: these stories matter. They're warnings, they're truths people overlook, and they remind us that even in the darkest nights, someone has to stand up, someone has to fight, someone has to be the protector. So if this story meant something to you, if it opened your eyes or tightened your chest or made you breathe a little deeper, then stay with me. Hit that like button, subscribe, share the road with me, because this journey isn't over, and somewhere out there, another voice is waiting in the dark, hoping someone like you hears it.